Hey guys. Just really quickly, who here is familiar with Lean and Agile? And I'm sure most everyone's heard about it. So just a heads up, I'm not an expert. I'm a professional, and I use it on a day-to-day basis. It's kind of what we base our internal structure on, how we conduct business, but it's also something that using it on a day-to-day basis, it's something we try to work with our customers to use as well, right? To try to give them a little bit of our culture and get them on board with us, because a lot of what we do is not just creating tech and working with individuals who need us to provide expertise with technology. We don't like to think of ourselves as outsourced groups. We provide a lot of consulting efforts, product design, and the only way Lean and Agile methods work is if everyone's on board, right? Product owners, the company we work for, us internally. So it's definitely something that, while I'm not black belt, Six Sigma, this or that, right? It's something I do use day in and day out. So just kind of going with that understanding. So just about myself, like was just mentioned, I'm a senior technical and creative consultant. So what that really means is I do a lot of product design at kind of a software level, right? So the companies we tend to work for are companies with ideas clear or vague, right? So sometimes it's entrepreneurs with a particular concept that they want to actualize, and they just don't have the skills to do it. They don't have the tech manpower to do it. Sometimes it's a company that has kind of reached the limits of their own technical capabilities. They have internal teams, software developers. They just need better guidance, right? Maybe they do a lot of outsourcing. They don't have a lot of tech leadership inside of their organization. They're really looking for someone to kind of come in and drive the design, drive that upfront process, and really move their teams forward. So that's kind of what I do on a day in and day out kind of basis. I started out as an engineer. I did that for about 8 years or so. The last five or so years, I've been working more in that design and upfront process. So a lot of that's working with customers. Most of the times, people come to us with an idea of what they want to do, right? They already know. They all know what they want to do. It's our job to make sure that they understand the cost of what they want to do and the true effort, and really get them to realize that. We kind of try to do that up front, vet the process, teach the process, right? Let them understand that even though they can come in with a requirement document, that it's not going to work out that way, right? And that a lot of that is part of Lean and Agile, really getting them familiar with the concepts, getting them familiar with the idea that they don't know what they don't know, and they're going to discover a lot in this process, and that we're going to be there to kind of guide them through it. So that's kind of what I do. So just really quick joke here I like to throw up. It's really more of a big data. It's supposed to be big data, but the idea is every company in the last 10 years or so thinks they know Lean. They think they know Agile. Their organization has transitioned that way because everyone is doing it. Every company, whether they've been around 100 or 200 years, or you just opened up shop yesterday, is doing Lean, is doing Agile, is adopting the methods, is buying the products. So a lot of times we come up to companies and we say, hey, here is how we do business. And they're like, perfect, that's exactly who we are too, right? We're in alignment. But when it comes down to paying the bills, they're like, whoa, like what's going on? I thought we missed requirements, scope grew, collapsed, we didn't deliver what we were supposed to. A lot of that is misalignments, right? Setting good expectations. Everyone thinks they're doing Lean, but Lean is really kind of a holistic approach, right? It's like religion, right? You kind of have to buy into the whole thing. You can't pick and choose, otherwise you're not a true believer. And that's Lean is that way, right? If someone doesn't buy in from the top of the organization all the way to the bottom, you tend to run into people that don't really understand what's going on. They feel like it's a lot of churn, misdirection. There's no clear requirements. The roadmap is too short-sighted, and you start having people question what you're doing. And that's why it's important always to kind of be clear and upfront about what it takes to do what Lean really is. So just a little background. Just a little bit of history on where lean really came from, this kind of boring stuff, but I find it pretty neat. But the idea of lean as a concept is something that started in the kind of industrial market, right, in manufacturing, as a manufacturing process. That's how I became familiar with it, as actually working with oil and gas companies, trying to convert their processes to lean. So really, that's how kind of I learned the ins and outs and the language. And while there's a lot up here, like I said, it's very esoteric. There's a lot of terminology and phrases and words like Kaizen and Jidoka and all this stuff. You don't really need to know what any of that really means, because it's very particular to what is known as kind of the Toyota production system, which is kind of the source of all this stuff, right? It's where it started. Was post World War II. Toyota was looking at kind of ramping up their automotive industry, and they didn't gravitate towards American automotive manufacturing processes. They kind of looked at other industries, specifically the grocery industry in America at the time. And that's kind of, they've started from the ground up a different approach to manufacturing cars, right? And so really the two pillars of lean and the Toyota production system is really just in time. So just in time as a concept is really letting consumers drive demand, right? Rather than maybe your suppliers or the producers themselves, right? Really having the customers drive the flow of your process, only building the things they need when they need them, and only in as much as they need, right? The other part of it is kind of this Jidoka word, which really means automation or automation with a human touch. So what that means is you may have a lot of process, you may have a lot of automation in some cases, true automation, but always empower the individuals within the process to drive, to stop, to accelerate those concepts, right? So don't give in to the tools, don't trust just the process, trust the people involved. And that's huge, especially kind of in the tech realm. So those are kind of the pillars. Obviously, the point of this is, the goal is highest quality, lowest cost, and shortest lead time, at least in the manufacturing realm. So how does that stuff relate kind of to any industry, right? So here are the kind of the core principles, right? First is define value. So what that means is that your organization and the things you kind of center yourself around should always be driven by what the customer is wanting, right? What they consider value. And value is whatever they're willing to pay for, right? And whatever they value and have kind of an attachment to. So really defining your process around that, centering yourself around that, making sure that's communicated throughout the organization, that you're driven by value, you're not driven by features, you're not driven by tech, you're not driven by just experimentation, what you want to do, a guess, right? You're really driven by the information that you have at hand, which is what does a customer really want? Map the value stream. So that piece of it is, okay, now you understand value, but can you describe the value stream? Can you, do you know all the workflows, all the use cases, all the user stories involved in achieving that value, right? So nothing is this, Uber is, yeah, you order a car on your phone, but what are the situations that drive the customer to want that product? And really, do you have that all mapped out? Is it something you can describe? Is it something you can visualize? That's something that's pretty key. Create flow. So that's really within your organization. You understand value. You've mapped the value stream. Do you have a way to provide that value in a way that's systematic? It's measurable. It's in small pieces, and it's something that you can visualize. So a lot of times in the manufacturing realm, Kanban is a big thing, right? You've probably seen tech companies with big boards and Post-it notes. That's a way to visualize process flow, right, within an organization. And those Post-its are the value stream, right? Those are the user stories. Those are your use cases. And the board itself is a way to visualize that flow. Everyone should have a view of that information, and it shouldn't be abstracted away in thick documents and large roadmaps. Lean and Agile is all about making the work transparent. Everyone knows what they're working on. Everyone knows what they're working towards. Establish pull, right? So that's how are you going to get the customer, and the concept of pull is having the customer request more or new value, right? So once you understand that initial value, how are you going to get the customer to want more? How are you going to grow your customer base? In tech, it's a matter of when are new features going to land, right? It's usually when it's in the hands of the end user. Establish a process where you can get the customers to really drive your process, so that you don't get in this kind of churn where you're working on the same thing and you don't know if you're providing value anymore. The customer is providing feedback, and they're really driving that flow through. Pursue perfection, right? So this is a big one. Is the idea lean is really centered around waste and the concept of waste and removing waste within a system. In the manufacturing realm, it's spare parts and time, transportation from supplier to the producer, stock on hand, sitting there waiting. It's stuff like that. In the tech realm, pursuit of perfection is bug-free code, right? No one wants to use it. And so what is it that you're doing to pursue that perfection? A lot of it too is process and flow, right? Are you making the process by which you produce a product something that people want to work within? There's a reason that Google and Amazon and all these companies try to create an environment where people feel at home, where people feel comfortable. That's why they do a lot of the things that they do for their employees. Your free foods and your laundry and stuff like that is because they understand that the pursuit of perfection within a system is really dependent on the actors within it, right? And employees are a huge part of making a good product, a perfect product. And so making them satisfied within that process, making it transparent, making it clear, making it incentivized, rewarding is something that's huge. So those are kind of the core principles of lean. Lean is the broad strokes, right? It kind of spawned off a lot of different approaches on how it can be applied to different industries, different pursuits. I'll be specifically talking about kind of tech and agile specifically, but there's any number of industries that have applied it, from UX and accounting, lean startups and stuff like that. So there's definitely a lot of, once you understand the core principles, it's really a matter of seeing how you can apply them to whatever particular organization you're operating within. So lean across an organization, right? That's really the key to the lean process. It's kind of the synergy of process, people, and policy. That's something we always tell our customers is we can write awesome software, we can write exactly what you want, but if there is a problem with one of these three spaces, it's not going to work, right? If you don't have a good process, if you don't have willing participants, good people, and if you aren't willing to enforce it through policy, then there's nothing we can do for you, right? And that's something we try to make pretty clear with our customers is lean is something that we apply across organization. We have a very flat structure. We try to be always available, and so part of that is removing a lot of bureaucracy, removing a lot of documentation, unnecessary processes, really, again, making our own processes lean. We tell our customers that in order for us to build a good product for them, that they have to do this as well, right? They have to be willing to adopt the lean concepts across their organization or their understanding of their relationship with their customer. So kind of, I mentioned this lean in practice, right? So what is lean? How does lean fall out? How do you use it? So we mentioned the manufacturing aspect of it, but there's any number of ways to apply lean to different organizations or applications. Agile is what I'm most familiar with. I work a lot in the tech realm, software development, so Agile is huge. Every organization that builds software today I'd say 90% of them are using Agile. It's important to kind of understand those concepts, and so that's what I'll be describing here. So any questions so far on lean or kind of the high-level concepts of lean? Yep. So lean in tech, right? Agile. So traditionally, kind of the early conceptualization of software and how software was built was really driven through old models of how things used to be manufactured in America, right? You would create requirements. You make sure that you captured every single potential requirement for that piece of software. You would design the solution based off of those requirements. You would implement that solution. You would verify it. So a lot of that is just, does it work as spec'd? And then you would deliver and maintain it, right? So this process is what we traditionally call waterfall methodology. So I've worked in this. I've worked with a lot of organizations that have worked inside of this methodology, and a lot of it is a lot of documentation, heavy meetings. You could spend months, weeks, years in the requirements gathering phase, trying to understand, wrap your head around everything that is the product that you're trying to build. And so it's very front-loaded, right? That upfront process is huge. It takes a lot of time. Design as well is another thing where, okay, now you have a thick book of requirements. How are you going to design something that meets every one of these needs? And typically the documentation renders down, because it becomes kind of a legal document, it renders creativity kind of null in that aspect, right? Is that you have to build it as exactly as spec'd, and it's spec'd in a way that not a lot of people understand it, right? It's a lot of bargaining that goes into that. Implementation, again, it wasn't or isn't particularly fun in this realm because the customer's telling you exactly what they need, or your organization is telling you exactly what you need. As someone who's implementing the solution, you're really constrained to implementing exactly that. So it causes a lot of people to ignore things they see as errors, right? Someone must have thought of this, so they must know exactly what they want. I'm going to ignore this really big issue and kind of march forward. So as you kind of move through waterfall, again, it takes a long time, it takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of people involved, and by the time you deliver what you said you were going to deliver, it's very likely the target's moved, target shifted, right? Whether that be a market, whether that be the user base, what the user value to begin with has shifted. I've worked on projects where we basically went all the way up to delivery and put it out there, and they've realized no one wanted it anymore because something else came along. And nothing is kind of hurts your soul more than software that isn't used. I still look at Google Analytics and I'm like, it's still down, and I'm still 0. So a lot of that is not understanding that things move, that things change, and not accepting that and building it into your process, right? So how does Agile kind of answer to that? So one is understanding that moving through projects is really kind of what we call internally the spiral model. It's also kind of a known lean or agile concept. That you need to tackle problems kind of in this spiral fashion, right? That you always need to circle around to the thing that you've just done to derive or to get an understanding of where you're going, right? So to us, a lot of this is understanding that the first thing we put out is going to be wrong. So let's get it out as quickly as possible, put it in front of somebody, and really get an understanding of whether or not the requirement we gathered, the value we thought we were going to deliver is actually there, right? So in this kind of spiral model, you're constantly circling on the things you're delivering. Again, it's very valuable. There's nothing more valuable than putting your software in the hands of individuals, getting them to use it, getting them to play around with it. A lot of times people they're afraid to go out on that limb because they don't want to deliver something they think is half-baked, right? They think their ideas, that if it's not all together, they're not going to get it, right? That if every feature isn't there, they're not going to want it. And that's typically not the case, right? People understand that what you're giving them isn't a final product, and it's your job to make them understand that there's more to come, and what you're asking them to do right now is just test the ideas, test your hypothesis, right? Because at the end of the day, that's really what you're doing. It's a scientific method, right? We created a hypothesis, now we need to test it. The longer you wait to test it, the more wrong you're probably going to be. So it's always important for us to really push out as quickly as possible, get something out in their hands. So what are the core principles of Agile, right? So individuals over processes and tools. That's something that's huge, right? Creating an atmosphere, a system where everyone has a role, everyone understands their role, everyone knows what they're responsible for and what the other individuals in the process are responsible to them for, right? This isn't the same as putting tools in, right? This isn't working out of some task management system or working out of a Slack channel or something like that. You can't put the tools of Agile in place and expect Agile to happen. This is really something you probably one of the biggest mistakes I see made in organizations is that they buy all of the tools, they do all the training, and they think that's enough. Right? No, it's something that it's a top-down approach, right? Again, through and through the organization, processes, tools, everything should be structured around this. How you reward your employees, how you work through problems. It's the individuals that matter. So working software over comprehensive documentation. Again, started because of the frustrations of the waterfall methods and kind of the heavy legal type documentation that goes in it. You typically don't need that much work, right? Software is pretty simple at the end of the day. And if everyone is understanding what they're working on, and if what you're working on is pretty constrained and small rather than a huge roadmap effort that lasts years, documentation is really the product of the collaboration within the system, right? Of individuals meeting, the stuff just kind of falls out, right? People take initiatives. You create your JIRA tickets or what have you, and the information, bug tickets. So all that information is usually constrained in there. And if you're working with a team, working with engineers, they're smart people. They're going to get it. Collaboration is a continuous process. Documentation really kind of stifles that. So to us, within our organization, documentation is really the products of collaboration. So every meeting has something that falls out of it, and if we met and nothing came out of it, then it's probably not a meaningful meeting, right? So we have project kickoff meetings, and we have what we call kind of milestone definitions. A milestone being the next value kind of stake in the ground that we're putting ahead of us, and that could be 2 to 3 weeks ahead of us. But that definition is a way of saying, okay, here's kind of that North Star. This is what we're heading towards. And the document, it's probably 1 page long, and it's really just describing, here's who's going to use it, here's why they're going to use it, and here's the value it's going to provide them. And that's all we need, right? What falls out of that is we bring in designers, we bring in engineers, they look at that, we discuss it, we get up on the whiteboard, we design, we'll have, and out of that we'll have wireframes, we'll have technical tasks and tickets that fall out, we'll have high-level architecture and design, we'll have process flows, system diagrams. That stuff just falls out because it's the natural process of solving problems, right? And it's in the tool set of the individuals involved in the process. And so that to us is documentation enough. It's also huge that you have the customer involved in all of these meetings, right? So we bring in our customers. They're involved in a lot of our design meetings. We don't like to design without them because inevitably there will be a misalignment and a misunderstanding. And if they're involved in the process, that makes them take ownership of that. They can't wait to the end to say, well, this isn't what I wanted to pay for. This isn't what I was expecting, right? So it's key to bring in those main actors, the product owners, the your domain experts, stakeholders. Everyone's involved in this process. Everyone is collaborating. Customer collaboration over customer negotiation. So that just kind of gets back to the point I was just talking about. Bring in the customer, right? You shouldn't be bargaining with them, negotiating with them. They'll typically throw out dates and what they're willing to pay for something. It shouldn't be negotiating, well, I'm going to remove this feature to get to that point. Well, I'm going to cut the budget even more. And it's an endless spiral. You'll end up with a product that's not worth anything to anybody. So really bring in the customers and collaborate with them, make them a part of the design, make them a part of understanding your processes and kind of what goes into designing something. That's typically where we find the highest buy-in rate from a customer in an organization, is if we can bring them in and have them really take ownership, drive the process, be something where they want to meet with you, right? They're saying, hey, I'm gonna drive 2 hours just to sit in an office with you and jump on a whiteboard. they want to collaborate a lot of times. They want to be a part of that solution space. A lot of times people don't feel like they can because they're not, they don't have the expertise to contribute to that process. So they're not engineers, they're not architects, they're not UX people, but customers bring in something valuable. They understand the value. That's something that we inherently don't understand. Responding to change over following a plan. So that's probably the biggest tenet of Agile, is that things will change, decisions will change. You'll do something and then realize you've made a mistake. You scoped it improperly. You overestimated the value it would provide, the adoption it would have. And so, what are you doing to respond to that change, right? Something big, kind of a big tenet of Lean, is being able to measure success. How are you measuring success? Is it clear? Is the customer on board with what success is, with what those metrics are? And it's not always in dollars, and it's not always in use numbers or adoption rates. A lot of time it's in just understanding that you've simplified the problem enough that it can be no simpler. This is the true thing that you're providing, and does that have value? If not, cut that feature set off. A lot of times we think that adding value means adding more features, adding more use into the app. That's not always the case, right? So be willing to respond to change. Be willing to throw away what you thought was true or valuable, and getting rid of it. That's always hard to do from a customer's perspective, from someone who's bought into this, whether it's an entrepreneur, they have this awesome idea, they're paying, they're working with us to kind of realize it. We put it out there, and they're not willing to accept that maybe they were wrong, that they were over the wrong problem. And rather than kind of shift and pivot and find the market, find that new user base, understand that what they've designed is not kind of in the cards for them, they kind of just stay on, and they say, no, we're going to keep going. They'll find us, right? That's not always the case, and seldom is. So that was Agile, kind of in a technical space. I'll talk a little bit about Lean Startup. We work with a lot of businesses as well to kind of, again, get them familiar with the Agile concepts, and a lot of entrepreneurs that want tech. So, yeah. So there's a lot of ways to be Agile, right? Scrum is one of those ways. It's something we've experimented with and leveraged. We don't call each other Scrum Masters. We don't kind of ascribe to the terminologies, but kind of, if everyone here isn't familiar, a Scrum Master is really someone who owns the process and drives the process. That is very key within Agile, right? Is someone who is sitting above the work to produce the product, and is really monitoring the health of the process. So that's once I've moved out of that upfront design phase, that's typically the role I like to take on projects, right? I do have a stake in the success of the product, but really my role is to facilitate the process and the individuals involved, empower them. I don't dictate the direction of the product. I trust my engineers, and so to that effect, the Scrum Master is very key, right? Other roles that are very key, you kind of mentioned it, a project manager. So I kind of differentiate the product side from the process side. So to me, a Scrum Master is purely someone who's monitoring the process, right? That's someone who's looking at the velocity of the team, right? Looking at the adherence to the Agile kind of methodologies and the concepts of Lean. They're looking at roadblocks, right? Hey, you guys tend to be meeting a lot. I don't see anything falling out of these meetings, right? Why? That's waste, right? And again, getting back to Lean, we want to eliminate waste. So unnecessary meetings are a type of waste. So really, as a Scrum Master, you're really looking at that landscape and making sure the team is healthy, the process is healthy, that the team isn't just churning. The project manager, to me, is more responsible for the health of the product, right? They're really examining whether or not we are meeting the goals of the product. Are we delivering value? Is the roadmap clean, right? Have we set a good plan for our customers? While Agile doesn't, we don't set a roadmap that's months and weeks ahead. You still need a roadmap. You still need to communicate expectations to your customer when they should expect deliverables. So project managers are huge in that aspect for us in terms of keeping budgets, keeping roadmaps, looking at the team and the velocity, right? So we, at least in our organization, we kind of split the two off. In terms of analysts, right? To me, that's someone who's always balancing the relationship between the customer and the product that's falling out, right? We tend to have someone who coordinates with the end users, right? Who's really looking at the success of the product, the personas involved within for that particular product itself, right? Who is the user? Who are these personas? What is the market, right? Defining that aspect of it. A lot of times people don't understand that. They have a great idea, and it's really an idea looking for that market, right? That's a huge, to me, a good benefit to an analyst being involved is someone who can kind of dig their heels into that, study the market, study acceptance, right? Look at the value. Are we delivering value? How are we measuring value? Do we have the metrics to do that? And are those metrics something that is transparent to everyone, right? In the same way that the Scrum Master should have metrics as well. And again, metrics are huge. We're at a point where most of this stuff can be automated in a lot of ways. It's not a lot of spreadsheets and reporting. Metrics on the health of the team, velocity, story points, burn down charts, right? All that stuff you can kind of get for free a lot of times if you adhere to the process, if you're using the right tool sets. It's very important. So I hope I answered your question. I kind of went on a ramble. So any other questions related to Agile, I guess, so far? So lean startup. So lean startup is really the application of the lean processes to more of an entrepreneurial space, right? Not really, although tech is a huge part of the kind of the bones of the lean startup concept. It's really more about looking at markets rather than users, right? And that's really the difference between the two. A market being kind of a revenue stream, a group, sets of users, groups of interests, right? Many personas. Typically in the Agile space, when you're working day to day, you're looking at single personas, single users with very specific workflows and needs. So the lean startup concept is really to tackle some of these, kind of factors for startup failure. So one of the big ones, is high cost to first customer. So that's something that kind of kills a lot of startups. It kills a lot of products, right? They kind of die on the vine, and a lot of that is people think they think it costs a lot of money to get that first, if I can get that first customer to bite in, but what's it going to take for me to get this app out, this website out, this concept into a place where people want to buy into it. So that tends to scare off a lot of people, and if it doesn't scare you off, it probably ends up being why your thing doesn't work, right? You underestimated the cost, or you didn't do it in a very agile way to where the cost ends up being so high. The second one is long tech dev cycles. So looking at startups strictly from kind of the tech landscape and the tech space, long tech dev cycles. So when you're starting up, people don't realize that most of the work to get tech up and going is always at the start of the project, right? There's so much structure that needs to be put in place, right? You're buying servers, you're buying licenses, you're buying PCs for your devs, and you're investing in your IDEs and this software, that software. So that tends to be something that kind of kills the will, so to speak, moving forward. Is especially for customers that we deal with, is getting them to understand that by the time you see that first deliverable, it's what we call kind of a level 0 or an MVP. It doesn't look like much to you, but it's going to seem very expensive, right? And really just making that transparent to them. But that's also a huge reason why things tend to fail, right? Is that the longer and longer you make that first product take, that first deliverable take, your costs tend to climb kind of exponentially. The third item, limited number of people willing to take on the risk inherent in a startup. So, I mean, that's kind of it's scary to be an entrepreneur. We've had a lot of people come to our door with an idea, a great idea, and they don't want to take the risk, right? And I can't blame them, right? I'm not spending their money, and it's very expensive to get something off the ground. And so, if you could, tackle those first two items, you would answer to that third item, right? There's not a whole lot of people willing to take a risk. So how do you diminish risk, right? That's really the answer that a lot of people want when they're starting a startup, right? How do I not take all the risk myself? The fourth bullet point, structure of venture capital industry and funding. So that's just, those are the structures around the startup industry, right? It's kind of a gambler's paradise out there. They're betting on every horse and seeing which one wins. And those structures, the industry around it, the enterprise around it, can be something that makes it very hard for you to be successful, right? Venture capitals don't have it's hard for them to establish value and success. Two, it's hard for you to understand what they're valuing and how they see you, why they would want to fund you. Kind of that fifth item, concentration of real expertise in how to build a startup. So that's a big one. That's something we see a lot. We see a lot of people with kind of that entrepreneurial spirit. They have a great idea. They don't have the expertise to get it off the ground, and they don't realize everything that it takes. So they tend to underinvest in things. They want software on a budget. They don't need to get their finances in order. They don't need to have vision documented. They don't need to understand who their users are, and so they tend to underinvest in that stuff because they don't have the expertises involved that to kind of help them build that vision. So really, Lean Startup was created as a way to kind of try to answer to these points up here, right? Is how do we make being an entrepreneur, having a startup, something that is democratized, right? Is something that everyone can do, everyone can accomplish. Especially in the landscape that exists today, everyone has the opportunity to build software, to build tech, to get to that first deliverable as quickly as possible, as cheap as possible. It does not cost a lot of money to get something like that off the ground. It's really just a matter of understanding it and kind of staying over it. So Lean Startup is really kind of taking those lean and agile concepts and applying them to the entrepreneurial space. So looking at the Lean Startup, and you'll see a lot of these concepts kind of regurgitated from Lean, regurgitated from Agile. There's really nothing new about the Lean Startup concept, except again that it kind of tries to answer to the market space rather than user space. But we kind of have ideas, right? So you ideate, you code, you build data, and you're constantly delivering on kind of in this circle, right? Again, spiraling and delivering and measuring. So a lot of that within the startup space is it's important to understand that software again is pretty cheap. It's pretty easy to build. You just need the right people to do it. But what you want more than that is data points, right? Understanding whether or not you're, again, over the problem, whether or not you're hitting the market, there is growth opportunities there for you. And so looking at the Lean Startup methods is really just a way to communicate that Lean or startups can use the Lean methodology. They can create products and deploy them pretty easily, pretty effectively, gather data points, and get feedback. The principles of Lean Startup, right? Entrepreneurs are everywhere. So again, democratize the startup concept, the entrepreneur concept, right? It's not a Silicon Valley thing anymore. It's something that anyone can do if they just have just the willingness to Google a few things, here and there. But there's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of opportunity out there. Everything is free. I don't think if I had to value the software on my computer that I use to do my job, it's probably sitting at under $100 that I've spent in the tools that we use on a day-to-day basis to kind of create custom software for people. So it isn't cost prohibitive to look into these tool sets and really kind of leverage the stuff that's already out there. Entrepreneurship is management. So that's a big one, right? Is you have to own, again, the process. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, it has to be something that you understand that you're responsible not only for the product and the goals of the product and the success of the product, but you're responsible for the people involved in the process within it, right? So really driving that from a manager's perspective is huge. That's I don't know that I can stress that enough. That's so our company started something like 25 years ago. The owner is still working today. He's kind of on a pushing around kind of walker, but he's a great guy. And the biggest thing I found with him is that he owns the process. He owns the individual. He understands that he cares about everyone, right? He's involved in the day-to-day. He'll dust off his keyboard and start coding if he needs to. An entrepreneur has to be just that, right? You have to own the process, communicate, evangelize, and really push it through the organization. Validate learning, right? So how are you measuring success? How are you learning, and how are you applying those learning concepts within kind of your delivery of a product? Do you have metrics? Do you understand what success looks like? Have you set acceptable, reasonable, measurable success criteria for your product? Innovation accounting. So that's really just kind of a way to twist around the idea that you still need to be accountable to the people that have invested into your process, into your product, into your company. Agile and lean, a lot of people tend to think of that as a way of like, I need no documentation. I don't need to show any evidence of what I'm doing to anyone else, right? But it's really the opposite. Lean and agile are about transparency, and that's both to stakeholders as well as the people within your organization. So you need roadmaps, you need budgets, you need to have all all that accounting in order, available to everyone and anyone in the organization. That's always key. It isn't a free-for-all, right? You're not just throwing out an idea and letting the devs kind of go at it and then see what falls out on the other end. Build, measure, learn. So that kind of just sums up the whole of the concepts, right? This is the process, right? You build something, you measure its success, and you learn from those experiences. If you're not shifting, if you're not constantly pivoting your understanding, you're probably not over the problem, you're probably not accepting that change, right? You're not hearing what your customers want, what the market is asking for. I've never built something that was right the first time. And I've never built a product that was 100% satisfied. I just ran out of money. Is really what it ended up being. And that's any product, right? It's never going to be perfect. You're going to keep building it, but what are you doing to measure and learn from it? So that's kind of the concept of the lean startup. From kind of a high level views. Again, just applying the mantras of lean, the concept of agile, but looking at it from kind of more of an entrepreneurial space. So any questions really quick on lean startup? Yeah. Yeah, so we work with a lot of, so I'll describe one waste in regards to a customer who we work to resolve waste or use software to resolve waste, but also touch a little bit on kind of internally what we've done. So a lot of lean is, again, managing the process, right? We, at least within our own organization, we considered waste fruitless meetings, documentation that went nowhere. Personally, I probably wrote, before really kicking off a project, probably write 20, 30 pages of documentation. A lot of that was self-imposed. I thought I had to do it. I was trying to front load my understanding of the process and put that in front of my engineers. So a lot of that was, hey, I'm going to document every user story. I'm going to get every persona down. I'm going to get every workflow, every state diagram in place, because when I hand it to my engineers, I want to make sure I've done my homework and really given them an understanding. What I failed to realize is that by doing that, I was pigeonholing them and not giving them kind of ownership in the process. And so what we've done since then is really looked at what's the least amount of information that it takes to get the first step within that process, right? So to us, waste in that process was really poor documentation, over documentation, right? The other thing we do is monitor our workflows. So we have very specific, again, looking at that Kanban style process visualization. We do that as well. We use a product called Jira to track our tasks, to track everything from designing to developing, testing. Everyone involved within the project is tracking what they're working on. It's not really how they work on it or how long they work on it or anything like that. But it's a good way to visualize where are we in the process. Okay, this is we're gathering requirements. Okay, we're designing. We're ready to implement. We've implemented and now it's ready to test. Okay, in testing, ready for deployment. And we have these lanes in these workflows, and we're constantly tweaking what those workflows are, because what we found is that sometimes we try to make the process too granular, create too much flow, too much process within that. So really making changes so that we can identify, what can we cut away here, right? What can we kind of trim away? And some of that has been process as well, right? That's a huge waste. Even looking at waste in terms of how long it takes for you to get customer requirements or customer feedback is a huge one for us, right? Again, making a customer feel happy with the product they're going to get. They don't think it's half-baked. Getting them to understand the limitations of an MVP, of a level 0, is tough. But we tell them the longer you wait, you're really working against that pull system, right? We want users to drive the demands of the next feature set. So the longer you wait, that again creates space, because developers tend to churn. If they don't have work in front of them, they'll find work to do and they're going to bill you for it. So always keep them productive, always keep them working. How we've used it externally, we work with a lot of companies that they're trying to use technology to optimize their own processes, right? Specifically, we worked for a company that owned frac trucks, right? And they needed to, or they saw an issue with those trucks breaking down in the field, right? And they were trying to get an understanding of, okay, why is that happening? Something breaks down, it shuts down the job shuts down, we're costing ourselves tens of thousands of dollars, right? And they thought their problem was documenting the issues out in the field, maybe poor communication between the field and the maintenance shops, right? So they came to us with, hey, we have this checklist. We want you to make this checklist a mobile app so that people can check it, right? And that was as far as their idea went. And we kind of worked with them to understand that what they were really lacking was poor process, poor policy, unwilling people, right? What they didn't realize is that people would purposely run the equipment bare and wait for it to break because the people that were using it weren't incentivized for it being up all the time, right? They were getting paid for the job to be complete, not for that piece of equipment to make it to the next job. That's someone else's problem, right? It's like your rental cars, right? Who cares about the rental car, right? I have one right now. I'm not going to worry too much about keeping it clean. It's not mine, but that's kind of how they saw their equipment, right? So for us, kind of applying those lean concepts was really getting them to understand who are the actors, what are their motivations, right? The guys in the field didn't care about the equipment being broken because it costs them nothing. The guys in the shop cared everything about the equipment being broken, but they weren't, their turnaround times were huge because of it. And so you kind of had these two forces fighting each other. And so we convinced our customer to to visualize, to add a true cost to that, what we consider waste, that wait time, right, from the equipment being down, and really document that, accumulate that, set a measure of success that says, if we were to get this software out, how much money would we save you? How much time would we save you? Do we have metrics that track that? And really working with our customer to create not only software that answers to a process, but building the process itself. Right, so that's something we work with them to kind of eliminate that waste, because then it trickles down, right? If the shop isn't worried about an influx of broken equipment after every job, they're not stockpiling the parts they think are going to break all the time, right? If everyone just maintenances regularly, we can diminish the waste of parts on hand, of the downtime at jobs, and so. In terms of quantifying that was probably our biggest step in terms of communicating and teaching a process to our customer, is getting the measurables down and then sticking to it, right? Deploying software, measuring the success, tracking utilization, and then achieving success in that way. So I don't know if that's my next. Whoa, lean pitfalls. So yeah, I'll admit. I came late into the lean game, right? I've been at this, again, probably 15 years or so. Started out waterfall and now I've transitioned to lean. So here's kind of some of the pitfalls that I see, things that I see a lot of people make mistakes with, right? Mistaking tools and processes for the application of the principles, right? So a lot of times when I see someone that says, hey, lean doesn't work, agile doesn't work, it's typically because they're not actually lean or agile, or haven't bought into it all the way, right? They've bought the products, they've bought Jira, they have Kanban boards, they're speaking the lingo, but they're not applying those principles throughout their organization, and they're not following it kind of with very much fervor, right? So that's a big one. I think that's one I see the most. The second one is spiral of death. So again, if you're not holding yourself accountable to deliverables, to measuring success, you will spiral forever. You will be constantly developing. It will feel like churn to your developers. It will feel like you're not making progress to your product owners. That's something even internally we struggle with a lot of times, right? Because we work with customers, they're setting the vision, we're relying on them to define the product space, and though we work with them and consult with them on how to measure that success and try to stay on top of the problem, if you deviate too far away from that, you're not going to be successful, and you're just going to keep going, right? It's never going to end. Bugs, feature. What are you? And you forget what you're building towards, right? So that's where you'll see a lot of negative feedback on agile and lean online is typically related to that. Typically from the developer's mind space, right? It can feel like, who's writing these user stories? Who is this product even for? Who's going to use this? And there's a lot of frustration from the developer side of it. Insufficient measuring of success and value. That's probably a big one. Sometimes it's hard to wrap your head around the intrinsic value of a particular feature or workflow or the product itself, but that's something you need to do. If you can't do it, you shouldn't be building the thing, right? If you can't describe the value it's going to provide your customer, it's going to save them time, it's going to save them money, it's going to do this, do that for them. If you can't put that into words, you can't communicate it to your team, you're not going to be successful, right? And you definitely can't measure it. So those are, and sometimes it's hard to do, right? And that's where I see a lot of pitfalls for teams with lean is they tend to worry about the technical. Their stories are very technical, their workflows are very technical, they're trying to solve technical problems. They haven't latched onto the true consumer of that information, of the product itself, and so they can't describe value, so they're not going to find value in the lean process. So it will fail them. So lack of buy-in from the organization. That's a big one too. I think a lot of times organizations think that lean and agile are for their dev teams or for their product teams. They don't think it's for management. That's a pretty big mistake. If management isn't bought into the concepts, then lean will not work. because it requires a lot of faith, and only the people in the process can have that kind of faith, right? Because you're involved in all the artifacts that fall out. You're involved in all of the meetings, and typically we see an organization fail when the CTO, the CEO comes in and they're like, "What is this? What are you talking about? I didn't buy into this. I didn't." And without that buy-in, without that understanding, without their involvement, without product owners being in those meetings, designing with you, you tend to see a lot of people fail at this, and vice versa, right? You can have a very visionary CEO that wants to push lean and agile, but if he's not getting his organization on board, you'll self-sabotage, right? And organizations have seen this happen to them time and time again. It's happened. Ford is probably one I can think of very recently. They've let go of maybe 3 or 4 CEOs in the past maybe 10 years, and a lot of that is the CEO he's forward-looking, right? He's looking at the market shifting out from under them, the tech space coming up, and how do we apply that to our cars? What he's not bringing along is kind of that old guard, right? The individuals underneath that are used to a very particular process, the understanding the product that they've been building forever. And so without that buy-in, you're kind of destined for failure on that stuff. Overlooking shifts in value or market, you can't prevent that a lot of times, right? You can have the metrics, you can set the value, you can describe it, you can document it, and you can work to solve it. But if you deliver it and you're not hitting that value, it's hard to want to pivot away from what you understood, right? It's hard to kind of cut your losses. It's kind of sunken cost theory a lot of times with companies is they've already, I put in so much money into this thing to have it do what it does. I don't want to abandon what it is that we have right here. It is a good product. It looks good. It does what it's supposed to. We are successful. They just don't know it yet. That's a big one too, right? And that's for everyone. Engineers have a problem with, they'll say, oh, we're throwing away code again. We're rewriting this again, right? And that's where if you're overlooking those shifts, if you're not getting buy-in, if you're not communicating why there are shifts, you'll continue down kind of that road, and you'll find yourself with customers that don't care and a product that's not used. So, in terms of kind of pitfalls I see within it, it's hard to communicate the principles, right? Again, it's more of a there's no one process, right? There's Scrum. Scrum is an application of it. There's rapid prototyping. There's extreme programming. There's just so much. There's DevOps, right? There's just so much stuff out there. It can all kind of be confusing to a lot of companies. Just internally ourselves, just working with trying to kind of latch on to the lean concepts and how we were going to leverage them. We honestly kind of just looked at what was out there, took the things we thought would work, tried them, failed, went somewhere else, tried it, failed, and even today we're still looking to kind of get our process kind of in a place where we feel comfortable saying we are 100% lean, right? There's definitely a lot of processes within our own organization that are not lean, that feel very waterfall, right? QA and quality assurance is a huge one. You can write software as fast as you want, but it's hard to test as fast as you want, right? Finding great quality engineers is a tough thing to do, and so it's easy to create a product that is buggy, that doesn't work like it's supposed to. We tend to fall into that space too, and we blame Agile. Hey, we're moving too fast. Agile isn't waterfall. If this was waterfall, we would have gone through X number of cycles of QA before it even touched the customer's hands, but now it's blown up in their hands and they're losing confidence, right? And we tend to shift the blame and say that that's an Agile problem, but that tends to be more of not adapting a particular silo within your organization to the Agile concepts, right? So QAing in an Agile space, getting QA to understand, hey, you are a part of the process. You are QAing in a lean and agile way. You're not going to get a release candidate days before we expect it to be released, because that's when we promised it, and you have to test the entire system because that's very difficult to do. So that's where we tend to see a lot of kind of bashing, at least of the lean process. So yeah, yeah. So our process, we kind of have tight spirals of design and development. So what we consider feedback for our customers is, one, involving them in the initial design, right? That's giving them every artifact that falls out of it, right? So wireframes, right? Once a wireframe is made, they're the first to vet it, right? Workflows, describing workflows and documenting them clearly so that we get their buy-in. Constant demos is a big one, right? So demoing the product, we're at least demoing, once a week, something like that. We work in weekly sprints. That tends to be kind of our work process, our flow. So we tend to review with a customer at the end of the week and say, here is what we have accomplished this week. Here is what we're planning to accomplish next week. Here, let me show you what we've done, right? There's no secrets with us, right? We're not going away for weeks and then coming back and it's going to be right. So we bake that in. We get feedback as quickly as possible. So constant demos is a huge one for us. No, I mean I can send some out. Nothing off the top of my head. There's any number, like the Lean Startup books are fine. The Goal is like a weird. I don't know if anyone's read, but it's kind of a fictionalized account of Lean applied within a company. So it's kind of like an odd fiction description of the Lean concept. I think that's I forget his name. Goldratt is his last name, but The Goal. I don't remember. Yeah, but The Goal is a very good book. If just to get in the idea of Lean is a good. Yes. So I apply the Lean concepts to like my daily life, right? And not all of it. I don't have scrums with my wife or anything, but one of the big ones is for me is I don't do to-do lists. I don't multitask. I understand that about myself. I'm not a very good multitasker. I don't think human beings really are. I haven't found someone who can do it very well. So what I tend to do in terms of how I manage my own day-to-day is try to accomplish one thing, and that's really all I do. This was my thing for today, so I showed up. I made it on time. So I am successful. In terms of productivity in the workspace, so we tend to do a lot of work with kind of tool sets that help manage the work for us, but chat is a big thing for us, right? Constant communication with individuals, right? Not waiting for questions to show up at the meeting, right? Having those conversations immediately, but also documenting what fell out, the decisions that were made or the things that fell out of those conversations, right? But just personally, how do I manage my own productivity? Again, it's just by not putting a whole lot on myself, right? Understanding that I'm pretty limited in my power within an organization. I'm working with a lot of smart people, a lot of skilled individuals. So my job is just to make sure that nothing's a barrier to them. And to be successful that way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah. So our company is a pretty good example where we only adopted Lean because it best described what we were already doing, right? It was already in the culture within our company. It was already in the values that we set forth. We were, again, very democratic. We were a company that we didn't have titles for a long time. Everyone was a software developer, owner on down. Everyone took ownership, right? We never blamed. That's a big thing to do, and a concept to have in Lean is to not be looking for blame, right? There's a lot of silos, a lot of individuals involved in the process, and the failure can happen at any point. A lot of companies will see failure by adopting Lean, but not changing their culture to go with it. So I've definitely seen kind of a one-for-one there. I've seen a lot of companies that do all the right things, say all the right words, but deep down they don't have the values. I don't think that kind of follow that. Even customers we work with, we try to communicate those to them, but and kind of tell them like, hey, we like to work with individuals that are like us, and they'll be like, yes, that's who we are. And again, they don't tend to follow through. a lot of times, and that can be for any number of reasons, right? They have stakeholders, they have shareholders, right? And that tends to compromise you sometimes. So.